Hello, I'm Gavin Palmer, and today is a Friday. And on Fridays, for the last 3 years, I have been meeting with Jason Delport, who was given an idea for a device which can be put in a desert and can transform the desert into a garden while housing over 100,000 people. We hope that this device will be useful in New Jerusalem and in bringing people closer to God. And today, I decided to hit the record button and pose a question and a prompt to Jason, which Paul Vanderklay often uses. And that prompt is, tell me about the home you grew up in. So I hope you enjoy Jason's story as much as I did. Here we go.
And
Right.
well, tell me about the home you grew up in. Well, tell me about the home you grew up in. So tell me about the home you grew up in.
All right. So tell me about the home you grew up in is the prompt.
So just to recap for the recording purposes of what we were saying just beforehand was that this past December, I ended up being in my mother's house with my brother and my sister. So it was the first time since we were children that only the four of us with no other family members were hanging out together. So it was.
So like 30 years or something?
Yeah, I'm in my late 50s. so more like 50 years really. So
Gotcha.
because my sister went off to boarding school. Obviously we still had school holidays when we'd be there together, but as we got older, friends would be around, all of that. So somewhere around the certainly high 40s would be. So it's been probably 45 years since we can say that has happened. But obviously now that we're adults and we've spoken with each other, and you discover that it's just an interesting question because my brother, we all have different experiences, and I was totally unaware of my sister's perspective on her childhood and my brother's perspective. I just assumed that it was as idyllic as I had pictured my own, and that's not the case. But
Yeah,
I mean,
it's like you can be in the same house, but it's different for each person.
It's different for each person, and which then begs the question: if you're living in the same house and you don't realize how differently they're experiencing life to yourself, how can you ever even know anyone? It's just weird. It's a human being is just, we're so deep, so complex, and of course we are opaque to ourselves as well, in large measure. So the home I grew up in was I grew up in the 60s and 70s on a farm in South Africa. A younger brother, an elder sister, and a mother who was at home, and she read to us a lot. She was the disciplinarian with her slipper, where she'd paddle your backside, and we'd pretend to be hurt and run off to the bedroom and sulk for 5 minutes and then be out again. Sort of played that sort of game, but it was all fairly painless and whatnot. I got on very well with my siblings. We almost never fought. There was a lot of, from my perspective, there was a lot of harmony in the house. and a lot of love, and sat around the family dinner table. And I mentioned that because in our household, we don't necessarily do that except for special occasions. We're quite informal in our own house.
So the point there is you would, as a child, you remember sitting around the dinner table?
Yeah. Sitting around the dinner table together, that father at the head of the table, he would generally lead the topics of conversation. He was quite, he liked to joke around and give people nicknames and so on. My dad was a lovely man. I was the only one to be pained, and I deserved it. And only once. That was the only time when it was necessary for discipline to be exerted, because I'd committed a fairly substantial crime of destruction, which needed a response. I was only 6 or 7 years old at the time, but and who knows why I did it. But yeah, my parents were discipline in the house was largely just a look, an expression, or occasionally something would be said, and that was in 90% of times that would be enough. We all wanted to please our parents, so that we made it really easy for them to discipline us, because they just had to indicate the slightest annoyance with whatever we were doing, and that would be sufficient for us to change our behavior.
What was the age difference with your sister and your brother?
Yeah, three between all of us. Yeah.
Okay.
And we were all born sort of September, October. So what does that make us? Christmas, New Year babies, something like that. So I grew up so on a farm in South Africa. Generally there are families living on the farm. The laborers' families would be living on the farm with their own wives and children. And so we would, because farms are isolated from, they're not in a town or anything like that, your friends would be the children from the laborers' families. So this was in apartheid South Africa, and in the Western Cape. The Western Cape was originally settled by the original people when the white settlers arrived, were what they called San or Hottentot people. So they were hunter-gatherers. And there was some inbreeding that originally happened between the white colonists and the local indigenous people. And then they brought in Malay slaves from Malaysia until they were freed. So there were no Bantu people in the Cape Town area, because the indigenous people who had been there had largely died out due to white man's disease, which was something similar to happen in South America. But this population, which was a blend of white and Hottentot inbreeding and Malays who come in, these people were, in apartheid South Africa, were classified as colored people. So you had these different racial classifications of Xhosa, Zulu. And so these were the black tribes. And then in the Western Cape, you had this group of people who were classified as colored. So, who were basically a blend of different ethnicities.
So there's a farm, your mom, your dad, your siblings, that's, a certain size. Like, how many families lived on the farm, being,
yes,
helping out with the work?
Yeah. So it was, so obviously our family, and then there would typically about 5 other families.
Okay.
There, and
was there so there were houses like on the for the families, and then you would go to their houses and play with these kids? And
we'd spend, when we were little, we'd be running around. We'd be playing with these kids, and as you grew older, what you did changed. So initially you're just running around picking flowers and playing all sorts of silly games and whatever kids do. And then as you grew older, you'd maybe go hunting with them, doing those sorts of activities. And then once you go off to the big smoke,
the big smoke,
which was Cape Town, which I went to boarding school, then at some point, the relationship changes, which is just the way culture works on you.
Six or 7 years old, you go to boarding school?
No. So we went to the local village was 5 miles away, 8 kilometers away. So we were picked up by a school bus, so during so what we call primary school was up to the age of 13. You lived on the farm and life continued unabated. And then as you became a teenager, etc., and you got interested in other things, so the relationship never changed. It's just that suddenly you were friendly with people, but they weren't your friends, they weren't your playmates anymore. So that sort of childlike relationship changed. So you'd still hang out with it, talk to them, etc., treat them like decent people, but they were no longer your best friends, as it were. So
that's interesting.
That changed.
Was that kind of like just something you learned based on like the culture you're in, and it's just the way it was for everybody? Or like, did you feel pressured, or is it just like kind of just trying to adapt and be like the people around you?
Yeah, it was basically cultural pressures. You became interested in girls. You wanted to,
I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember becoming interested in girls. I had a few friends who probably got their feelings hurt a little bit. I got too interested in girls.
Yeah. And then you also you bring, once you're in boarding school, in high school, you're bringing mates over and you're basically just hanging out with them. And then it's motorbikes and girls and goodness knows what else. So that all that changed. But it also, interestingly, very good friends of mine in boarding school, because I went from, so in South Africa, the official language when I was a child was Afrikaans, which was this mix of Flemish and Dutch and German. So the government then everything was, government business was conducted in Afrikaans. My schooling was in Afrikaans. I only spoke English to my mother and friends of my mother. And then I went to high school, which was an English medium high school, but in boarding school.
High school was the boarding school? They're the same thing?
Well, boarding school was, so we called boarding school, was just a boarding house. And so my primary school, there was 50 children in the entire school. It was really small. And that was from grade 1 to grade 7. And then in high school, there were 650 children, which was, that was quite a jump for me. I was kind of in shock for about a week. But in the boarding house, the boarders were country kids. Most of them grew up in farms, and most of them spoke Afrikaans as their mother tongue. So I only started dreaming in English in grade 11, interestingly enough. But so all this instruction was in English, which wasn't a problem for me because my English was fine. It's just that I didn't often speak it outside of the house. But in the house, I'd have to speak English because my mother couldn't speak Afrikaans.
That's what, yeah, there's like a, that's interesting. I bet there's just so many stories in there all the way through with your siblings. Um, and I guess some, as you said, you mentioned how sometimes like there's these memories with your siblings, memories with uh, the people who helped work on the farm, and then as at around 13 years old, as like for example, your sister would begin going, I imagine that all of a sudden she's kind of doing this thing where you're no longer playing with her as much at that point. And similar,
Yeah.
like whenever you end up going off to public school or to the high school, um, something like that might happen with you and your younger brother, including, so like there's this, that's just interesting. And you mentioned like a boarding house. So like, does that mean you would sleep at like like at the same place where you would be going to high school?
Yeah. So on the school grounds, there were these just call them residences or dormitories in them. Or that's probably the best way to describe
Right.
it. So these when you first arrive in grade 8, you're in larger dormitories of about 13 boys. So this is a boys only school. So there'd be 13 boys per dormitory. And then as you move to grade 9, it would maybe be half the size in 5. And by the time you in grade 10, 11, and 12, you have your own private room, by and large. And actually, sorry, it's only grade 11 and 12 you have your own private room. In
And
grades not, yeah.
would you go back to the farm on the weekends?
No, so you'd be a term boarder, and you'd get one long leave out and one short leave out. So long leave out would be, so per term you'd go home for one weekend and then one half weekend, and that was it. So and
Wow,
the rest
that's
of
so different. That's so different than what I'm used to. So
yeah.
it's what
So
I'm
it
thinking about.
was.
Harry Potter is what I. That's the closest thing I have in mind is Harry Potter.
Yeah. I mean, and you're forming obviously strong bonds during that time with with. So as in Harry Potter, I was in a clique of, there was 3 of us who were very close, and they and because I grew up on a farm, many of the boarders were farmers, not all of them. Some of them came from country towns. So so invariably from about grade 7 onwards, I was bringing friends home for leave outs, and these were sometimes one of them was a day boy, and the other one was a boarder, but he would quite often come to us instead of going home, which was a bit weird. But his parents lived very far away, so he generally came to our place for leave outs and only went home for holidays. And our farm, it was just a magnificent property. It was on a lagoon near the coast with mountains, and we had motorbikes and boats, and we hunted. It was just paradise for and my sister rode horses, and I wasn't into horses, but so we were just unbelievably fortunate. My the labourers, when they did fencing, so they dig fence poles by hand because labour was cheap, and then we had this old Land Rover, which is call it what do you call a truck, right? A truck with a flatbed, a work vehicle on the farm. So this thing had to be moved sort of 30 meters from fence post to fence post. So they taught me when I was 6 years old to drive the Land Rover in first gear from fence post to fence post. And then that's when I was 6. And when I was 7, I informed my dad that I could drive. So he said, all right, come show me. And I totally mucked it up, and I had this vehicle lurching all over the show. So the dad just calmly said, I can still remember the whole thing. He just said, just calm down, relax. I can see you know what you're doing. And that settled me down, and I just drove it. And then 2 years later, he was telling his sister, who was living in the Cape Town, that I was driving. She says, "Oh, that's very nice. I've got this old car that is sitting on, it's unregistered and it's sitting on blocks, because if you have an unregistered car, it's not allowed to have wheels on, or it didn't then. And I wonder if Jason would like this car." And so my dad sent a truck into the city to pick up this car. And so by the age of 9, I had my own car, and I was driving around, running errands for my father, and driving. I then drove my brother and his sister up from the farmhouse 400 meters up to the main road to meet the school bus. So we used to walk it. Now we could drive it. And then just leave the car parked on the side of the road while we went to school, and then coasted down the hill. I mean, we were just so spoiled. So it's not funny. But yeah, so I was driving at the age of 7. I was arrested at the age of 7 for driving illegally on a public road, a tractor, when we were moving sheep from one property to another.
You were arrested?
Well, this cop pulled me over, and I thought it was on an unsealed road, and we were literally at walking pace. I was driving a tractor with a trailer behind the flock, and the purpose of the trailer was to pick up any stragglers or lambs that were struggling. And this police van rolled up, and I wasn't concerned, because to me an unsealed road was, you know, farm road. And he pulled me over, and he was this big guy. I was very small, so he looked very big. He might have been a small guy. I felt like he was a giant, and he pulled his notepad out of his pocket, and he had me standing in front of him, and he took my name down. The whole works. So that night, so my dad wasn't with us, and then that night when we, this was a 2-day trek to move the flock of sheep from one farm to another. So when my father met us at the overnight place where the flock was overnighting, I got into his vehicle, and I burst into tears, and I informed him that I was going to prison. And he just burst out laughing, and he said, "No, the guy was just scaring me." for half a day, I thought I was going to prison for driving at the age of 7. But yeah, that's the sort of life that we had. I mean, I was running around, I was shooting guinea fowl with a shotgun at the age of 7, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, to bring it back to, so that was all the fun stuff. But to talk about faith and those sorts of things, I essentially learned I was exposed to Christianity at school. It was very much part of the Afrikaner culture. When I left the school, I was given a Bible to take to high school, and I've still got that Bible fully engraved front in a leaf. And my mother is a Christian, but my father had been to church and didn't like what the message of my father was a very quiet man of some faith, but church and him didn't sit well, and I must have gotten that from him, because I'm of the same ilk. I'm not a member of a church, and I used to be an atheist, so now I call myself a believer, as you know.
Right.
But my mother has been going to church. She didn't. We went many times with her, and I was always bored to tears and not paying attention. But yeah, my mother was the savior of the family, as it turns out. But Yeah, and I became, when I was in high school, I wasn't there for 6 months, and I became one of those very obnoxious, loud, very outspoken atheists, and it was that for about 6 or 7 years until I.
Jason, is there a way to get closer to your microphone?
Oh, sorry, Gavin. Yeah.
I don't know. It's like, I guess your microphone's in your headset, and maybe it's right there on the.
Yeah, maybe it's the way is that better?
It sounds much better now.
Oh, good. Um,
I
it's
messed up your
obviously,
style though.
yeah. It's sort of, I think Grizz likes that.
Yeah.
Likes that look. Anyway,
Chris Pacal liked it as well.
yeah, and it's all, I've done it because this is the living room in the house, and my wife sits, and she's not here at the moment, but when I've got my desk in the living room. So when I'm watching YouTube videos, my wife's watching TV. So we like to be in the same room together. So in order for me to hear her, I've got to go with that style.
Yeah.
So I just got used to it. But yeah, there's no need for me to maintain that style.
You have a habit.
I have a habit, yeah. I do find it gets a bit hot
But
with these earphones.
I want to point out, so like you had said you were spoiled, and I'm wondering, like, when did you realize you were spoiled? Like, how long before you realized you were spoiled? Because when you're
Oh,
spoiled, I don't think you realize it. It's just normal.
that was just life, yeah. No,
Right.
as soon as I had to go and work, I realized that. I mean, in fact, it was a little bit earlier. I was in third year university when I informed my father I didn't want to be an engineer. I wanted to go to the farm because and I mean, I'd known that I loved the place forever and a day, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I ended up doing engineering because it suited what I was good at academically. And I'd obviously growing up on a farm, you're working with machinery and whatnot. So it seemed like the thing to do. And for some reason, it turns out I don't have a green thumb or an agricultural bone in my body. So the fact that I didn't do agriculture probably made sense because I just it's not a love that I have, but the lifestyle on the farm was, I really wanted my two of my children were born on the farm, and we lived there for 7 years, so they had a slight taste of it, but they were really small, so they didn't really get to express their freedom as teenagers on the place that I was able to do. But and they didn't have their own cars either, so there was all of that. But yeah,
you also mentioned like you were exposed to Christianity at school, and you were given a Bible. And I didn't catch what you had said about that Bible. You said something about it.
Yeah, it's I've got it on my bookshelf. It's got my name engraved on there was a whole calligraphy thing down, and the date, and yeah, all of that, and who presented it. So each of us at the school. So I was in a big class. There were 13 of us.
You didn't
We all
desecrate
got
your Bible
Bibles.
like you didn't desecrate your Bible like I did. You still have it.
I still have it. I left it with my mother for many years, so it's heavily underlined, and that was her work, not mine.
Okay.
And I don't refer to it much anymore. I do my reading online. But it's the only Bible I own or have ever owned.
You and this is recorded, so just as a reminder, but you don't have to go deep into it. But it's like we had mentioned right before we started recording, is that, or maybe right after, like your perspective on the home that you grew up in is different than your brother and your sister. And, I'm sure your mom and your dad, everyone who's connected, like even your friends and the kids you played with that were helping on the farm. Yeah. Like, do you, have, Yeah, what do you know about the other people's perspectives that would be interesting and relevant, to the home you grew up in, that you were blind to at the time, And you don't
Yeah,
obviously
so
you don't have to share that, but yeah, I'm curious.
yeah, so unfortunately I can't. My sister's quite a private person, and I
Right.
can't. I'll honor that.
Right.
But yeah, to me, um, although it's as if I was living in a fairy tale,
It
and I
sounds
was,
like it. Yeah.
and to a large degree, the troubles of the world had no impact on me. I didn't want to know. I was in my own dream world. And awakening from that really, which only really started in my mid-20s. It took I was very immature for a long time. I was literally wrapped up in this paradisical world for so long that
So others
it,
others in your family may have seen the stuff that you were ignoring, and
yeah,
you went
yeah, and
in.
which I
Yeah,
didn't, which I had inklings of, but could not understand it, had no frame of reference to understand it. Um, so yeah, I was,
I'm with you. I think I have it's similar. We have similar personalities with regard
yeah,
to that.
yeah. I loved reading. So to me, even so, it's just a bit weird because I was also enjoyed being outside, but there were periods when I would just read, and then other periods when I had friends who wanted to do things. Then we'd go out and do the hunting and the motorbike riding and whatnot. But um,
It's like a life was a
I had
joyride or something. Like you're on this ride and it's fun. It's an
yeah,
adventure. Yeah,
and there was no there was no darkness for me.
for you. Yeah,
And it turns out that for others there was.
right.
And South Africa was a land of darkness, and I was oblivious to it. I was oblivious. I was shattered when I, you know, was, and everyone was talking about it. It just washed over me. It didn't stick to me at all.
And
Um,
this is so mid-20s. You mentioned because I asked when you
yeah,
realize you're
yeah.
spoiled, and then it's like so around mid-20s. Like, was there a moment that kind of opened your eyes to like that there was a darkness that you had been ignoring?
Well, the at the end of university, we all had to go and do national service. So that was a rude awakening.
I got you.
Uh,
I got you.
Now there'd been, I was aware of news items, but again, it just didn't seem part of my life.
Yeah, you didn't like
Uh,
pay attention to politics and things like
no,
that.
it bored me to tears. I had no interest in it. Although my parents' generation, that's all they would talk about. Politics was the all-encompassing. It was the age-old South Africa. So my parents were on the progressive side. They wanted apartheid to end, etc. So they were the political enemies of the governing authority. And so so when my parents, when these big family groups would get together, the old folks would go and talk politics, and the kids would go and do other things.
Hmm.
So because and occasionally we'd be, the kids would be there eating, and the adults would be there, and we'd hear what they were talking about, and it was just not of much interest to us. It just didn't. Whereas for them, they knew just how sick South African society was, and it concerned them greatly. And it took me until my mid-20s to even begin to notice it. And I was bad. I mean, I was bad. I had friends who were politically active in school already. with a strong social conscience. To me, this is my life, that's their life.
I don't.
And never the twain shall meet. It was
I don't know how much
crazy.
we control those things. I don't know how much we should, like, for example, feel ashamed about those things, except that, we can remember them and remember people. Like, even now, there's people who are like you were, right? It's like,
Yeah.
and then we can have forgiveness for the people who
Yeah.
are who ignore,
I mean,
who kind of are doing life the way you were doing life,
Yeah. I mean, I was raised right. I treated people with love and care face to face, but then their lives would go on, and my life, when they intersected, you treated people well, regardless of what walk of life they were from. And so there's not much that I feel shame for as a child. There are a few occasions, very faint flashes when I was little of, where peers would treat a person of a different race, and not terribly, but not very respectfully.
There was like a lack of love or something.
And there was some sort of derision or joking going on, making fun at someone else's expense.
Right. I was the one
of an elder person, and this for an Afrikaner was a big deal, because it was so ingrained for that culture to be respectful of your elders, and then to see them treat an older person of a different race poorly was what just happened there, sort of thing. Because in our household we didn't do that. We weren't raised that way.
Yeah.
But
it's like, well, what do you do about it? Like, are you supposed to be confrontational? Like, how are you supposed to deal with those things,
Well, and
it's not obvious to me. Like, and I was the bully even in some cases, right? I was the one that probably said the things like the things I acted and said things that I'm not proud of, for sure.
Yeah. So,
but then nobody really confronted me about it either. And so it's like we lack the skill in being someone who can be gently confrontational. And it's a little sad to not have that skill.
I related something to my siblings and my mother. She was quite taken by the story. So I witnessed something at high school. So I was in so when you get there in grade 6, you're basically you're nothing. You're treated with you're hazed, and it's legal to treat you very poorly. So you go into a boarding school situation as the youngster, and you're like, you're gonna get treated poorly. And then
by older children or even staff, or
no, not staff, by older children.
Right. Okay.
And this was boarding school culture. There was this whole hazing culture which had been there since time immemorial. And so, but when you're in standard 7, it's all over. So I was in standard 7 and entering the locker rooms.
Standard 7. This is a certain age, a certain grade.
Yeah, sorry. So this is grade 9.
Okay.
So age 14, 15, somewhere around there.
Okay.
And yeah, thanks for that standard thing. Is only in South Africa. No one else knows what I'm talking about.
And this is the period of time when you're rooming with other people before you get your own room in the boarding house. In the dorms.
Yep. So you're still hanging out in sort of dorms of 5 or 6 kids. And anyway, so we had a new guy come in. So he was the same age as us, but he was new to school in the boarding school. So now he had to be treated. He had to go through the same rigmarole that we'd done the year before. Even although he was our peer, he was subject to hazing, and he was one of those guys. I still remember. Bruce McDonald. It come from a good school, similar sort of setup, Afrikaans only, and come to an English school in the city. He was a good rugby player, and rugby players were valued, but he was a new boy, so he had to be hazed. So I walked in on the scene where a guy 2 years older than us was beating him mercilessly and kicking him on the floor. And there was about 3 of us there, and I was just watching this. Now, the guy that was delivering this thrashing had a beard. He was fully muscled. He was what, 17 years old, and he was like a fully grown man, and we were boys. And we were just watching this, and of course we couldn't touch him because that was the culture. There's theory. And then a class colleague of mine walked in there. He ended up being the deputy head, and he was a nerd, a skinny kid, very bright. He walked in on the scene and immediately took charge of the situation, and he shredded this bully verbally, and he dismantled him psychologically. This guy, he was punch drunk. He stopped what he was doing, and this went on for about 2 minutes, and then he slunk out of there. He got shamed by Andrew,
by a skinny nerd.
By a skinny nerd, and this made such an impression on me. It was inconceivable. What I'd witnessed was inconceivable.
Good for Andrew.
Yeah, good for Andrew. And I was just flabbergasted at this. I was never going to intervene.
It kind of brings tears to my eyes.
Yeah,
it's a good story.
I mean, it's made such an impression on me.
It's the kind of story. It's like I wish I could have been that person. I've seen things like that.
Yeah,
and there's things like that happen. It's a good story, right? So because it's the kind of pattern that you want. That there's some way to cast spells with words in a way which will be good, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, it turns out that this person who delivered the beating, he was, I believe, he'd had something terribly wrong going his formative years.
That's the way things work. Yeah.
And he ultimately committed suicide as an adult. He's the brother of a friend of my brother. That's why I know about it. But and I just, he was deeply disturbed. He'd had something very horrible go wrong in his makeup as a child. And when you behave, I mean, to me, what he was doing was inconceivable, and because I'd never ever witnessed anything. So I came from this idyllic farm life. I never got bullied at school. People just left me alone. I had this aura around me. It was, don't bother with Jason. I wasn't scary. I was a nobody. Nobody.
Easy to ignore.
Well, but I was liked. But
you're liked.
But I was liked, and I was I don't know. I don't know how other people saw me, other than the fact that I was left alone. Nobody bullied me. I'd never bullied anyone. And then I come up on the scene. It was like I'd stumbled into an alternative reality. I had no frame of reference. I'm not ashamed for not acting. I don't blame myself, because I just literally didn't know what I was witnessing. But what Andrew did made such an impression that I
wonder what motivated Andrew to behave the way he did. Like, had he learned that somewhere? I'm just curious about those things, but it's a good story.
Yeah. I actually I could call him up one day. We had a high school reunion, and I ended up talking to him because I missed the reunion, but the whole WhatsApp group got formed, and we ended up chatting. I ended up chatting with a bunch of people. them. So I could call up Andrew one day and ask him, yeah, because I've,
it's
Andrew
these are
and I weren't friends, but we liked each other, if you know what I
right.
mean. We hung out in different circles, but we were in similar classes. So we were both academically good at maths and things like that. But he was way ahead of me so I was a terrible student of English. I was only interested in the sciences. He was an all-rounder. So he was way more mature than me, no question about it. But what he did there was more than just maturity.
I would
It was
guess that
just,
I would guess he learned that, and he maybe even saw like there was somehow maybe a
yeah.
parent or somebody.
That wasn't the first time he'd been exposed to a scene like that. I'm
Right.
just gonna
That's amazing.
grab something.
The home you grew up in. When I asked this question to Kim, um, like she started with describing her childhood home, like what it's like to walk through the front door. And I said, I'm kind of like, well, the home you grew up in includes your, did you have a mom and a dad? And she's like, no, you asked me
Yeah.
about the house I grew up in. And so it's interesting. Well, I'll
Yeah.
express something and I may even want something. And I'll do a prompt and then it just opens the door for the other person to share.
Yeah.
But it is, these kinds of things like they shape you. Like I can't imagine what it would be like to live on a farm, you know, being able to go, well, I would say, yeah, that I guess I have some similar experiences. But there's your house you had a certain number of bedrooms in your house, and you had a certain number of like there was I don't know even like radio, the technology in the house. Like all of these things shape you. It's very interesting how all of these things are
Yeah.
part of the story. Sometimes they're minor details, but yeah.
Yeah. We only got TV when I was about 11. My mother used to play. We had the old gramophone. My parents had a lot of albums, so I remember listening to all sorts of music. But
You said your mom read to you a lot as well.
yeah, when we were little, she read a lot, and so I loved reading books, but I sucked at grammar, and I couldn't write a story to save my life. And
I feel like we're wired similarly, Jason.
yeah. So I mean, now being adept at communication and language, I see this as now as far more important than skills with maths and physics, right? That's where the action is, and I sucked at that stuff when I was and then I did engineering, so I dropped all the soft sciences, and I've been focusing on that stuff in this corner. That's what's important now.
I think for this recording, I want to try to ask a few more questions, but I think I want to do a different recording where we go into you're becoming a believer journey. But I'm curious, yeah, when did you? Yeah, there's a couple of questions. There'd be was there a teacher in school that stood out as being your favorite teacher? As you're going through these schools, and was there any that you remember and are grateful for?
Many.
Many.
I remember all my teachers except for I can't remember my first two grades. Those teachers have sort of faded away in memory. And then what, but from grade 3 onwards, I can remember all my teachers, and they were all, most of them were great. Because they care, I think most children have good experiences in primary school. Or back in our generation. Oh no, okay, maybe I must speak because I'm my father-related stories of teachers who are fairly hideous. So
Yeah.
again, I was blessed. The teachers that I had, almost all of them were
Did any inspire?
cared for their children. They were interested in their lives of their children.
Do you remember being inspired and encouraged?
Yeah. I mean, so we had this. All right. So here's an example of I didn't know the story. My brother told me the story of his experience with the same teacher that I had. So there's this teacher. His name was Tiki de Jager. Tiki was the smallest coin back in those days. It was a fraction of a cent of the British pound, in the English monetary system. So it's like a quarter cent or something like that. There's this time. So Tiki just meant small. This guy was 5'5", somewhere around there, and he was absolutely terrifying. And he was. So I did advanced maths in grade 7, and this guy, he had one glass eye. So when he was looking at you, he was not looking at you because his head would be tilted off to the side.
I know what that's like.
And he would he would take pleasure in terrorizing. So just as we were hazed by in the boarding school, this guy decided he was gonna test your character, I suppose, is what he was doing. Because by the time we finished, he was on best. We were best buddies. He was that kind of guy, and he would quote Jane Austen and this poet and that poet. He was very faithful. He was a believer, so but he'd talk about play. He slotted into the corner. It was play. John Viveki and him could have a conversation. He was a polymath, and he'd spend half of the class where he's supposed to be teaching us maths, he'd be doing other things, and he said, "Oh, we better do some maths and da da da." And because this was an advanced class, most of us, it wasn't a problem for us, so we could do the curriculum and do this other stuff. And my brother related a story where for some reason or other, they got Tiki de Jager in their first year, and they were so it was far worse than anything we'd experienced because they were new in the school. Everything was terrifying. These were country kids.
And Harry Potter, there was the Mad-Eye Mooney.
Yeah. And precisely. So, and Tiki would say to you, "Can't you see I'm talking to you? Can't you see I'm looking at you?" Because he knew that his head was skew, and because somebody had told him this, and it's obviously. So he made a thing out of it, and these poor little kids. I mean, you're just terrified. And my brother relayed the story where this friend of his, just was so flabbergasted and gun shy that he was struggling to get words out, and Tiki de Jager got red in the face and stormed across him and actually hit him in the face, apparently. Now, we'd heard stories that Tiki could do this. I never witnessed it, but my brother said he did. And that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. don't know what. He did have a temper, and obviously he thought this kid was being insolent, and he lost his temper. But so I'd heard terrifying stories about Tiki Diago. I'd seen him be a bit scary, but again, he never ever I never had an issue with him. And then the funny thing was, in grade 10, we'd done, he basically done pre-calculus work, and then he laid out this problem for us that he gave us 3 weeks to solve. The problem was prove that the something to do with that a circle, a shape with a set circumference, a circle has the largest area for any shape with the same circumference, something like that. That was the problem. And turns out I don't think anyone else tried to do it, but I took this challenge on. And 3 weeks went by, and I thought, oh, I think I've got it. I've cracked this thing. And I still remember being in, when we had official study in the boardings, there'd be a prefect sitting up, just like in Harry Potter. There'd be a prefect sitting up there supervising, 2 grades in this boarding school. So we'd all just have our desks and doing an hour of official study time after dinner, before we go to bed. And so I was sitting there working, and these 2 guys, and I was, oh, what are you working on? And I'm telling them, oh, look, Jason's working very hard. So anyway, 3 weeks go by, and I cracked the problem. I knew I'd cracked it. I couldn't see my way. So anyway, so he goes. So now this is grade 10. So this was our second year in thing, and he's not on first name terms and ticket. And I'm not the kind of guy that puts my hand up. I'm sort of harmless, and nobody bothers me, and I don't bother anyone else, and I don't stick my head over the parapet anyway. So, but I'm pretty sure I've cracked this problem. And so he asks, all right, anyone solve the problem? And I look around the class, and no one's sticking up their hands. So I thought, oh, here's my chance. So he says, all right, Mr. Delport, come and show us your work. And so I start describing the thing, and I'm waffling a bit because, it's the first time I've been up at the green board. And he lets me go for about 2 minutes, and he says, all right, Mr. Delport, very well done. Sit down. You've just invented calculus. And I was like, wow. He just gave me this huge commendation. Now, as I said I relayed the story to my brother and sister. And now, obviously I hadn't invented calculus, because it'd given us, all the maths necessary
he had prepared you to take that step.
It prepared us to take the step. Exactly right. And that's why he set the challenge to see who is gonna take the trouble to do this, and have I prepared them correctly. And so obviously when I came up with a solution, I said, all right, you used all the building blocks that I gave you, and you put the picture together. Well done. But boy, was I bucked with myself. And Tiki, it's the only time I always did well in my exams and whatnot, and Tiki Diago knew who I was, but I wasn't the brightest one in the class, but I was the only one to solve that problem. And in years afterwards, I would go to school and to watch my brother. My brother is a top sportsman in the school, and Tiki Diago had a great interest in sports. And I'd go to watch my brother play rugby. And I'd run into Tiki Diago, and he'd say, hello, Mr. Delport. and then all he do was talk about my brother. He had zero interest in my life. He just wanted to tell me what a great athlete my brother was, which I mean, we were all pretty proud of him. It was pretty good, but it was that, you know, so whatever impression, I didn't make any impression on Tiki Diaga, but but he made an impression on me. And in later life, you know, especially in this little corner thing, I look at Tiki Diaga and say, man, you know, if I'd paid more attention to the to the poetry and everything else, I'd be streets ahead of where I am now. I'm still trying to figure all that stuff out.
That's great. I like that. There's like these people that we encounter in our story that shape us. Like there's a lot of influential moments and people, and yeah, I like those. I am gonna do a time check on this soon. But
yeah, no, sure. It's midnight here, which is normally when I start getting nervous about calling it as well. But yeah, I mean, I don't know why you want to record me waffling about my own life, but
yeah, I mean, it's well, maybe I will agree with I'll consort with you, consult you before I do anything with it, but I'll just save it for now. But yeah, I mean,
you're welcome to do with it whatever you want. I've got no qualms.
All right, well, that's good to know. But yeah, I mean, I've got a lot. Well, first of all, I'm practicing. Like, I want to practice. Like, to me, it's practicing loving people, right? This is the thing, you know, in your story, Andrew and Tiki, you know, despite the Tiki slapped the kid allegedly, I'm sure there's something in there that's coupled with love and probably coupled with fear. Like even that, and nobody's perfect.
Yep.
But yeah,
nobody's perfect.
Right.
So
I've done worse. You know.
So just another funny story about Tiki Diaga. Just because so when I was in grade 11, so these two friends of mine, the one was a day boy and the other one was the guy's parents lived far away and used to would come to my farm for most leave outs. So I was a notoriously bad singer. So these two guys, I don't know what got into them, but the assembly hall had an upper gallery as well. So we were on this particular assembly, which is when the whole school gathers for Bible reading and general announcements and whatnot. We were sitting in the upper gallery, and then these guys egged me on to sing. So I said, all right, I'll do that. I could sing. And so I, you know, gave it my best effort, which had the two of them rolling in the aisles laughing. And Tiki Diaga was the officiator, and he called them both out and gave them cuts. That was so cuts is where you literally get a cane laid across your backside for laughing during singing of a hymn. And I sang. I didn't laugh. I just sang there seriously. But my singing voice is terrible. So they wanted me to sing so that they could laugh at me, and then they got punishment. And Tiki Diaga meted it out. Even although at that age it's rare for, you know, the elders in the school to get punished, they got nailed. So that's Tiki Diaga.
Yeah, there's a in the back of my mind, the thing I'm wrestling with is you know, worrying about what other people think, and that's what I'm personally wrestling with, and I'm trying to balance that out with this practice of loving people, and so it's really, I think I've been in a place where I could like like the way I would approach the Bible, for example, when I was younger, I would just go in and just try to tear it to shreds, and I'd be the smartest person in the world, and I'm smarter than all these people who wrote the Bible. And I could approach like your story, and I could try to, shred tiki to, I could like just tear into verbally with
Yep.
my self, my grandiose, my
Yeah.
grandiosity, just
You
start
could you could
criticizing.
judge him, right? Yeah.
Well, I could do anyone. I could do your mom, your dad. I could do
Yep.
your country. I could do, and it's like I want to. What I see now is like the practice of loving is like it's just knowing, like, for example, you're in this fairy tale as you're in it. And it's and every single person is doing that to a degree. And it's like we're born into this world as babies, like that we poop
Yeah.
ourselves, right? It's like I have that
Yeah.
question about Jesus. Did he poop himself? I suspect he did. You know? um, and so this it's very it's very tempting to kind of put yourself up and condescend toward the world, and then but it's also it's in us to be forgiving and to remember that we were all babies. And so I love this approach with the Paul Vanderklay style of saying,
Mm.
so tell me about the home you grew up
I
in.
mean,
And if
yep.
everybody was honest, they'd start out and say, well, to be clear, I used to poop myself, right? It's like, and everyone, yeah, you could probably
Yeah.
say it even more funny. Everyone came into this world shitting themselves, you know? It's like,
Yeah, and apparently there's a risk of us exiting the world in the same way. So.
that's right. That's right. I have a story with my grandmother like that.
Yeah.
She had Alzheimer's. It's like, so, and my grandfather, I got stories, vivid memories of older
Yeah.
people, and they've got scientific words for for this. You can fancy it up and make it sound
Yeah.
polite, but all right. Well, yeah, doing this practice. It's good for me. It helps me be someone who loves people better. So it's a bit selfish in that regard. Hopefully, it helps me be a better service. And then we get to also practice telling our story, right? We can we can figure out the parts of the story that um, can actually be of service. And sometimes there's parts of our story where it's like, uh, yeah, I can talk about the times when I was the bully, and I can talk about the times
Mm.
when I messed up. And back whenever I did it, and there was a moment where I'd be ashamed about it, and now like I can talk about it because you know, I could talk about the nastiness that was in me that, somehow, God has dealt with, right? There maybe it's a transformation. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, there's an art to being able to tell that story in a way where I think ultimately, it's like the trying to go after the lost sheep. And so being able to give that testimony is to tell those stories, and being able to do it well can be very powerful, giving testimony. And even the testimonies don't even have to be focused on, it just depends on your audience. It's good to it's good to be honest about it, but yeah, and
Yeah.
using the right words and casting the right spells in an honest way, in a way that's going to be good for everyone who encounters it. Like, I think that's the practice. you know.
Yeah. I mean, when I look back, and and obviously how much you can relay verbally through this medium is, but I sort of gave you that impression of my naivety and how sort of I must have had had a rich interior world, and the exterior world was veiled to me, and encountering that scene that Andrew Leary was prepared in a I mean I've never encountered anything like that before or since, and I can't imagine there are too many Andrew Learys out there who knew that. But I looked at this, and it never I didn't even feel ashamed that I wasn't able to do it. It just never entered my conception to even consider it. The fact that he did was wow.
Yeah.
But
even that story, I could criticize Andrew because, you know, this guy ended up going on to kill himself, but it's like it's like, I mean, we're never going to be perfect. Like, even when we do the thing, or we see people do the thing that inspires us to be better, you know, even those people aren't perfect. Like, we can continually get better. So, but it's a really good story that, like, because you don't want to sit there while someone who's broken is going to break someone else, right? You don't want to do that. And then we can get better at how we handle those situations too.
Yeah, but you know, just thinking back to it's like it's like my right brain. I was in my own little world that I was not consciously guiding. I was just moving through life in some form of subconscious manner, whilst taking notes of what was being unveiled in front of me as life went on. And in some sense, that was unusual. I don't know. It's like I remained a child for a long period. That's what I mean. I certainly had a sense of, in my 20s, of being somewhat shamefaced about how immature I was when I, when I met my wife, and how I.
That's the next story. Like, for me, the next story is marriage, you know, and meeting your wife. Like, I think those stories are really cool too, because marriage changes you, being a parent changes you. You know, these teachers, they all shape you so much, right? So we kind of just started with, you know, tell me about the home you grew up in, and, you know, your home though changes over time. You know, eventually you've got a wife and you've got children, and you become a kind of believer. You know, and then it's all connected in with, you know, there's some kind of a mission that you're on right now as well. So, and they kind of interconnect in all kinds of ways too.
Yeah. So if I could ask you, you know, having listened to me trying to describe that sense of being immersed in the world, letting the world sort of, I don't know. Did you have a similar sort of relationship with the world, or were you much more aware and sort of taking note and reacting to, because I didn't have a sense that I was putting my, I was letting the world sort of drive me rather than trying to change my I just went with the flow, sort of thing. I was in a flow. I don't know how to describe it, but it's how would you
well,
if you've got,
I would say, like, even right now, I will, like, go into the flow, right? But also every day, so there's moments in every day where I'll kind of be in the flow, and then there's moments every day where I'm attempting to kind of control things, and I don't, and it's not, and so I can think back. It's like, I think just having my mom die at a young age, I think that there's a thought that probably arose, and the thought was like, you know, that what could I have done different? You know, something like that.
Yeah.
So I think that shaped me into someone who does have that thought. And I was told at a young age that I was, like, I think I had a coach that said, "You're the most coachable person I've ever encountered." Right? It's like, I was told that. I was told by a teacher, um, you will be a great teacher. And so, you know, he sounds like it's kind of like the pain and the sense of loss at an early age did something. And even my brother, I'll hear him. I think my brother will have a hard, you know, his mom died too. He's my younger brother.
Yep.
And so he'll talk about moments where he will have a level of control, right? And then when
Yep.
you have that level of control, you then can be tempted to just judge other people who don't have it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what's in the back of my mind is who I am, what's a part of me, who my brother is, and this wanting to control things and this capacity to control things compared with, having loving people who where that's an underdeveloped muscle, right? It's a
Yeah.
muscle that it grows over time, and we didn't even choose to have that muscle grow, but
Yeah.
our environment shaped us. So, but yeah, there's many times where all of a sudden I'm in the grips of something and I lack control. Even and then there's moments in time where I would think I controlled almost everything. Like I'd carry that weight, but even being blind to the things where I'm not, where I'm actually being gripped and not even knowing it. So I think it
Yeah.
happens to everyone that
Yeah.
we're kind of being led for like in a stream or a creek or river that has a flow and branches, and we're just kind of along for the ride. And then so we slowly gain agency where we can see further ahead and maybe learn how to control this vessel and try to point it in different directions, you know.
Yeah. Well, as you know from our previous ruminations of how we're going to progress our project, there's very little, just control is in my conception of life. As I've wised up, I've realized just how little control one does have, which
Right.
is which is freeing in a sense, right? Because that in my sense now, I'm just saying, Holy Spirit, I can only do what I'm going to do, and then because I can't control other people, then you just inject the information that you feel like you're called to impart, and then
Well,
leave it up. Yeah.
Tiki did it. Like Tiki prepared you to be able to solve calculus. And so the controlling other people thing, I think that's the right approach is that you just prepare the set and the
Yeah.
setting and then the other person walks through the door,
Yeah.
It's so it's that's the way I think that's the way. But and it's a
Yeah.
loving way. That's where I'm trying to learn how to like when to be confrontational and the most confident I can be is like uh, that I can stand for love and I can practice standing for love. Um, so that and I'm not good at it, but I'm going to practice it. Right.
Well, being a husband and a dad is it's a good grounding to build on. So
Yeah. And a lot of opportunities
yeah.
to make mistakes too.
Oh yeah. And your kids will let you know one day about all the mistakes you did make. We did that with our parents one day. It was a fun encounter when we were in our early 20s. We met them in a pub and then told them about all the mistakes that they made. And
Well,
and, and
there's the Bible verse we started with before we recorded, and we're talking about the fullness of the Gentiles.
and tells, yeah,
It's like it's nice to receive feedback as soon as possible about your mistakes, and so that's where it's nice to have a wife who can give
yeah,
it and you can receive it, and then it's also to encourage your
yeah,
children to be willing to give it and you can receive it instead of letting it sit for long periods of time. But
yeah, yeah, yeah,
we're not perfect at this stuff.
absolutely. All right, Gavin, I think
Think you're ready?
probably
Thank
need.
you. Yeah, it's a good time. I think my family's
Yeah,
about to head out soon, so I need to
yep,
go say good morning and goodbye to them for the day.
yep. All right, and it was somehow we always find things to talk about, which is great. Always
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, we've been talking for a few years now.
Yeah, quite a few.
I enjoy it. Yeah,
Yeah,
I hope there's many more to come. So,
yep.
all
All
right,
right, my
Jason, thank
friend.
you. Have a
Go
great one.
well. Yeah,
Until next
bye.
time. Bye bye.